All right, we are live. It is another edition of the Crosspolitic Countdown. I'm Andrew Southwick, along with the founder of Crosspolitic, Gabriel Wrench, otherwise known as Waterboy, as you can plainly and fondly see. And we are joined on this episode by former state senator and Crosspolitic contributor, David Fowler. Welcome, one and all. Let's get right into it. First things first, of course, the big news right now, Jimmy Kimmel fired or suspended indefinitely. That's the term. There are a couple of reports. ABC wants to bring him back once the waters die down, so on and so forth. But of course, Kimmel suspended indefinitely, likely fired for his comments about Charlie Kirk in the aftermath of this. This has brought up a firestorm of free speech concerns, a firestorm of government overreach, all these kinds of things, cancel culture. Let's start, Gabriel, with you. And then, because I know that Senator, that you have some deep pieces on free speech we want to get to as well. But I want to start 30,000-foot view. Gabriel, what is your read and takeaway right now? What is going on here?
Let's start with the shallow side of this conversation, me first, and we'll get to the deeper side, David. Yeah, so the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing, he basically made a joke that was basically, he said MAGA killed MAGA. So it was a dishonest representation of what had actually happened, and so that's why he got suspended. Now his suspension, like you said, I'm hearing both things. Like some people, NBC wants to keep him, but I saw a video this morning of a trailer pulling up and moving stuff out of the studio. So I don't, who knows? It could have been a video from 10 months ago and people were trying to claim that it was moving Jimmy Kimmel out or something. But I would say that the thing for me, first of all, Jimmy Kimmel got suspended by a company and not by the government. Now the FCC definitely was excited about it, cheered about it, clapped about it. I'd prefer in my government world, I'd prefer there would be no such thing as the FCC. But a lot of people have also been charged with FCC with actually being involved and actually requiring the firing of Jimmy Kimmel. And as far as I know, that wasn't true. A lot of people are doing illogical this is that kind of logic, where they're saying, hey, ABC fires or suspends Kimmel for free speech. And then the leftists are saying, hey, remember when all the right were frustrated about cancel culture? Well, how come they aren't talking about Jimmy Kimmel? How come they aren't on his side? How come they aren't? This is not that kind of thing at all. A private company can do whatever they want. Now, the issue, and then there's Kamala Harris just tweeted out on the 18th, I think it was yesterday, yesterday. She tweeted out, what we are witnessing is an outright abuse of power. This administration is attacking critics and using fear as a weapon to silence anyone who would speak out. Media corporations, from television networks to newspapers, are capitulating to these threats. We cannot dare to be silent or complacent in the face of this frontal assault on free speech. So now the left all of a sudden has found free speech. Where was the left in 2019? Kamala Harris, right when Donald Trump got suspended on Twitter, says, look, let's be honest. Donald Trump's Twitter account should be suspended. This is actually before Donald Trump got suspended. He got suspended, I think, in December or January. So she was already advocating months before Donald Trump got suspended that he should be suspended from Twitter. And of course, we know Twitter was absolutely a government quasi-fascist relationship between the federal government and Twitter. ABC is a little more clear. The lines are drawn a little more clear that this is just straight up their decision, even though the FCC was definitely clapping for it. So, Obama has tweeted out against this. A number of leftists who had nothing to say, who did not care one whit that President Trump got suspended on Twitter as president of the United States. And we're talking about Jimmy Kimmel. So it's, part of when I kind of think about these things, one of the things that I want to see in people, and one of the things that I respect in people, is their ability to be consistent. Just be consistent. Okay, I might disagree with your worldview. I might disagree with how you think about things, but at least show me that you can be consistent. And if you can't be consistent, your views, your thoughts, your reasoning is not to be respected. So, I honestly, I think most late night comedians should be fired for not good work, for not being good, not being funny. I think that's the bigger reason why you should be fired. I mean, Stephen Colbert, he's gotten so unfunny to me. It's disappointing. I used to love Stephen Colbert at Comedy Central. But what was funny was he was funny when he was actually playing a conservative.
So Gabriel, I have a follow-up question for you, and then I want to bring Senator Fowler in. Um, I don't know if you read the report, because you mentioned that, this isn't a government pressure, but the FCC, I mean, I do think there was some pressure from the FCC, and they do have standards on networks that are different for cable. But Nexstar, which owns Kimmel Show, or
ABC, something, yeah. Uh-huh.
They are right now have a proposal in front of the FCC and CAR, and that proposal, should it go through, would give Nexstar like an 80% 80% of the network in household television. So
Wow.
There are some that say, well, gee, it would stand to reason there might be some additional pressure from the FCC on Nexstar, on the company, to actually move or to hold it. It is true. You're right. The private company did it, and there are different standards for networks than there is for cable, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not saying this is necessarily some kind of backroom shadowy deal, but there are other pieces at play here and some incentive, because as we all know, Trump administration and President Trump, he does like it when you do things he likes. And if you want to get something across, it's good to do something that might put him in his favor. Did you see that report, and what are your thoughts on that?
I did not see that contract or that report on the contract. So that would be interesting to confirm that. It's all so this goes back to, like, delete the FCC. But delete Department of Education, delete the FCC, like, give us our freedoms back and stop trying to, input government in a way. David, I know, is going to have some stuff to add to this, but intrude government in a way that they have no right to be involved in these kind of conversations and relationships. And having basically a contract in front of the government, which is what that proposal is what it sounds like it is of course they're all in bed together at some level. And I just want to untangle that mess and let Jimmy Kimmel get fired for saying stupid stuff and not being funny.
Let me share this real quick. Thank you for your patience, Senator Fowler, but I want to share this so you can see what I'm talking about. It was originally that story originally came out on Deadline. This is from Fox Business, but it's Nexstar is wanting to acquire Tegna. That requires FCC approval. That's what's before the FCC. And then, of course, this is at the same time you got Kimmel going down. So that's what's happening, and it's widely and well reported that is a thing that's happening.
So reports also, again, this is need to be confirmed, but reports also were that Jimmy Kimmel was losing about $20 million a year, up to $20 million a year for ABC. And so that's an easy fire, especially if you're trying to get the government to sign off on a contract. Let's get rid of Jimmy. Not only will clean up some of our budget problems a little bit, but it'll clear the way for a better contract with FCC approval.
Let's get the senator in here. Senator Fowler, thank you for your time here. I want to ask you from the free speech component of this, and you can educate us on some background history and what is free speech, what isn't, because that's been a big concern on the right and the left, on the moderate, on the progressive, on the conservative. Help us make sense. Are we in a free speech crisis here?
Oh, well, no, we're not in a free speech crisis. And this will sound strange and be that deep thing that Gabe was talking about. We're in a what does it mean to be human crisis. And the Supreme Court of the United States, nor any of our political leaders or influencers, know what it means to be human. And I say that because if you don't know what it means to be human, you don't know how to speak about people or what should be said about people. And so anything and everything goes. And what's happened here, and Gabe, as you mentioned, getting rid of the FCC, I think people can picture, oh my gosh, what are they going to start putting on television or whatever else? Well, in part, the market would control that. But there's something else that would help control that we've completely forgotten about, and that the Supreme Court screwed up in 1925, and we've been living under ever since, that has perverted the entire concept of freedom of speech. And I'm happy to explain that in just a couple of sound bites. But
Yeah.
one of the things that William Blackstone, and he wrote the commentaries on the laws of England. He's been called the preeminent expositor of the common law by the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said that the Constitution was written in the nomenclature of the common law. It's to be interpreted in light of the common law and its history. Okay, so I'm on solid precedential ground, but I mostly stand alone, except for Second Amendment advocates, because in my experience, even the Christians don't go back and look at anything to do with history, but instead rely on the most recent pronouncements of the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Okay. Now, at common law, William Blackstone said that one of the fundamental rights of all persons didn't come from the Constitution, but based on the understanding of what it meant to be human, is the secure, and I'm reading a quote here, the security of his reputation and good name from the arts of detraction and slander are rights which every man is entitled by reason and natural justice, since without these, it's impossible to have the perfect enjoyment of any other advantage or right. Okay. So what Trump is doing, and that was a news story this week, he just sued the New York Times, where a lot of this garbage started in some sense, by saying you have said false, malicious, slanderous things about me that have caused damage to me. That's the common law cause of action or kind of lawsuit where you can recover because the security of your reputation has been ruined. Okay? And Joseph Story, in the first comprehensive commentary on the Constitution written in 1833, and he's really the brains behind Chief Justice Marshall in the early years of the court. He said that the First Amendment, if you think it was intended, I'm quoting here, intended to secure to every citizen an absolute right to speak or print whatever he might please without any responsibility, public or private, is a supposition too wild to be indulged by any rational man. He continues, and listen to this. This would be, if you allowed this, to every citizen a right to destroy at his pleasure the reputation, the peace, the property, and even the personal safety of every other citizen. Men would then be obliged to resort to private vengeance, make up for deficiencies of the law and assassinations. I mean, just let that sit for a minute.
That's amazing.
And yet, what the Supreme Court did in New York Times versus Sullivan, a 1973 case, it effectively wiped out the common law remedy to sue for your fundamental right of security and your reputation when you were a public figure, a public official, which goes to the question of the Fourth Estate we may not have time to get into. But then they continued to extend it to public figures. So because I've been a state senator, you could say anything you wanted to me. I believe David Fowler's a pedophile. I believe blah, 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 blah. And then they say, well, you know, I'm sorry. I didn't really know. Maybe that wasn't true. And the court says, well, you can't really defame a public figure. So the Supreme Court has contributed to the coarsening of civil society, which is why I wrote in Crosspolitic in news in an opinion, please, Mr. President, this is months ago, sue the New York Times.
Yeah. Which he is now, isn't he? Or
Which he is.
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's written in a very Trumpian style. I read the complaint, because I'm probably the most electric and whatever president in the world. And, you just read through all the fluff and puff stuff. But he says, you've said things about me that are false. You've said them maliciously. And it's caused damage to my wealth and to my businesses. And he's suing not just the New York Times, but the writers of articles, the writers of books, and Penguin Publishing for putting them out. So here's the point, going back to your freedom. And I know you want to interrupt, Andrew, but just a second.
Sure.
If we actually went back to the common law, people would watch what they say and put on television and in the news because somebody would be suing them and bankrupting them. But we don't do that because we read the latest opinion of the Supreme Court and don't know our history and don't know the Supreme Court has perverted the purpose of the free speech and press clause. Okay, now open for questions.
What? So how can Trump sue? He's a public figure. So how can he sue?
Well, theoretically, under the New York Times versus Sullivan, he couldn't. And that's why I said, please sue. Sue the New York Times. The New York Times got off in 1973 because they said, well, he's a public official. And then, as I said, later cases extended that to public figures, which is why it was so amazing that Johnny Depp, won a defamation suit because he's a public figure, right? So what Trump has to do is he has to take the Supreme Court back to the common law and the history underlying the text of the Constitution and say, it was never intended. Here's one of your chief jurists on the Constitution. It was never allowed for you to say whatever you wanted to without consequences for the damages to a person's fundamental right that doesn't come from a Constitution to enjoy my reputation and get that case reversed. And then, by golly, we'll start watching what we say.
And so you're saying that basically you're arguing that this case was in 1925, you said? Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the case about public public officials and public figures, that came in 1973. But it was in 1925 that the United States Supreme Court, and this is just amazing, it says, we assume the freedom of speech and of the press. And if you'll remember, the first words of the First Amendment say, Congress shall make no law.
That's right.
So the question becomes, well, wait a minute. Why are you now applying this in a state law case? And here's what they said. We assume, without citing any authority, any precedents, anything, that this First Amendment is protected by the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. So the Supreme Court began to write substantive things into a clause expressly directed to due process. That's how they gave us homosexual marriage. That's how they gave us pornography going all over the place. Okay. And then finally, in 1931, 6 years later, they say it's no longer open to doubt the liberty of the press and of the speech is within the liberty of the due process clause. And then in 1936, they say, well, this has been settled by a series of decisions of this court. So we rewrote the Constitution, and we've said it now for 6 years, so it's well settled. And nobody in the Christian community, when it comes to pornography or anything else, challenges the fact that your decisions are not law, but judgments in particular disputes between particular people. And you've rewritten my Constitution.
Wow. Yeah.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then we have a long history of judicial misinterpretation, and then really eisegesis, if you want to use a hermeneutical term, into the Constitution and rewriting it. You mentioned with gay marriage, Gorsuch helped us along with that a few years ago. Right. But it sounds like you're also or at least hitting on a judicial supremacy issue, which we do have, I believe, in this country, where and we see it. I mean, the Democrats do it all the time. They'll try to pass a law. They don't like it. They run to the courts to get a judge to issue a ruling in their favor, and then they try to make those injunctions nationwide and those rulings nationwide.
Right.
If President Trump is successful in this kind of lawsuit, how do we also fight the judicial supremacy? Because who's to say that, Ninth Circuit doesn't decide, well, never mind, we're tossing that out, throwing it out, and we're making a blanket injunction, as we have seen with many of President Trump's executive orders. I think he had the most injunctions between February and March of any president in history.
Well, one thing you do is you keep suing. And let me give you just an example. I think it was in the 1870s, maybe. The Supreme Court announced separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson, dealing with rail cars, okay? Trains. But the liberals don't quit. They said, well, does that apply to this? Does it apply to that? Does it apply to this? Does it apply to that? And finally, in 1953, 55, 58, I think it was 58, but they reversed. So what you do is when the Supreme Court says, we've gotten the Constitution wrong, we don't have to redecide every case at one time, but we can say Mr. Trump has a right to recover his fundamental right to his reputation when he's lied about. Okay, we're going to do that. Now, when the Ninth Circuit says, well, yeah, but, well, you sue over there, you take it back to the Supreme Court, and they slap them down again. And finally, when Congress wakes up, it does what legislative bodies are supposed to do. They restate the common law when it's become forgotten, and they pass a statute that now is law. And don't forget, in Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, it says the power to enforce the 14th Amendment is given to Congress, not the courts.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's a case after adoption of the 14th Amendment, Ex parte Virginia, where the court said, but for Section 5, giving Congress the power to enforce it, the provisions, the substantive provisions, would be nothing more than just a moral statement. So they were acknowledging until Congress gives me some power to do something,
Mm-hmm.
or Congress does something, it's just a nice platitude. But we've forgotten that too.
Let me ask you one more follow-up question in here. One of the back up real quickly. One of the critiques from the right on the firing of Jimmy Kimmel and all this and free speech and one of the reasons why they say don't do that is because, well, if we do it to them, they'll do it back to us, which is true. Now, Gabe, you already talked about they did it to us, all through COVID and everything else. They've done this already. So it kind of gets that tit for tat game. My concern on that is this, not so much because I think accountability is absolutely necessary. You mentioned Senator Fowler, Congress's penchant for doing nothing, and they have to wake up at some point here. Because if there isn't a safeguard from these lawsuits, if this is not successful in terms of putting up some kind of wall, some kind of protection, or a mutually assured destruction, or whatever you want to call it, the rubber band does snap back. I mean, we might be firing, Jimmy Kimmel might be getting fired or technically suspended today, but the progressives are not going to be afraid to figure out a loophole and figure out how we can arrest you for your Facebook post tomorrow.
Yeah.
How do we protect against that? Because evil does not restrain itself, and the opposition will not go quietly into the night. Yeah,
that's wow. That's a whole nother 2-hour episode. The magistrate is called the diaconus of God, the minister of God, and it should punish evil. So there's a role for the government, and there's the role for the individual. Okay, so one of the things I thought was pretty terrible dare I say horrifying, and probably contrary to what Charlie Kirk would have said, is when at that vigil somebody defaced something and shouted something. People started beating him up. Charlie would have said, wait a minute, that's not how we respond as Christians. As Christians, I'm to be like Christ, who turned his cheek to outrageous slanders and libels, to kill all forms of rivalry and create a unity in the person of Christ Jesus as the perfect high priest, king, and prophet for God. Now, the government has to do something different. So we need to distinguish what I do. And that's what I think Joseph Story was saying. If the government doesn't do its job, you're going to wind up with, in his own words, people taking the law into their own hands, and you'll have private vengeance and assassinations. I mean, he predicted what would happen. So the Supreme Court screwed it up, and we've gotten exactly what he wrote in 1833 we would get. So the government needs to wake up, and the first thing they need to wake up on, along with the Supreme Court, is start answering the question again, what does it mean to be human? Because that determines how I treat people.
Yeah.
Here's a question for anybody. Gabe, you might want to jump back in. We got only a few minutes left, so this is probably all we're going to get to today, but it's been incredible and very fascinating from Senator Fowler, so thank you for all that background.
Sure.
I'm sure you've seen in the UK already, you have UK police officers showing up to the doors of grandparents, again, asking them about their Facebook posts and either issuing citations, in some cases arresting them, arresting little old ladies standing across the street from abortion clinics, silently doing nothing, holding no signs, praying for the people in the clinic, not even praying that no abortions would take place, although probably, but in the general, just praying that God's will would be done for everybody in there. They're being hauled away. Now, a lot of times we look across the pond, and what's over there ends up washing to our shores eventually in the years to come. And I realize, I think, as Senator Fowler said, it's probably another 2-hour show, and maybe something we need to pick back up. But again, I think it's still valid that if we don't have safeguards, and I don't know if it's doctrine of lesser magistrate, if we need to get down to our sheriff level and whether or not to enforce some of these things on the local level, because again, if Democrats get in the midterms, the rest of Trump's 2.0 is going to be impeachment. You can see that coming a mile away.
Sure.
And so then we're going to be lame duck there. And then when you get to 28, no guarantee Republican win. Maybe we do, but again, who's to say? Oh well, you said that so and so was a fascist or a socialist, and that's hate speech. So we're going to show up at your door. And what I'm getting at, I took the scenic route to this question, but here it is.
Yeah,
I think overarching all of this is we have spent a long time as America trying to erase and replace God.
right.
Get him out of the schools, get him out of the hospitals, get him out of the courtrooms, get him out of the public square, get him off social media. Let's be honest too. But now we're finding that as it happens, leadership abhors a vacuum. There must be a morality. There must be a standard. But it's like we're trying to find a morality without God. John Adams was one that said, listen, Constitution's for religious and moral people. And if you don't have that, it is wholly insufficient. If we're not going to be a country based on the Judeo-Christian principles and founded like that, any morality we institute is going to be one-sided and up to whatever king we elect from election to election.
Right.
How do you see that playing out in the next 2, 4, 6 years?
Well, I'll make a couple of quick observations. We need to appreciate that in 1935, I believe it was, the United States Supreme Court, quoting atheist Oliver Wendell Holmes, said of the common law, there is no transcendent authority, and the only authority is the state. So that was the official declaration that God is irrelevant to any legal precept and the understanding of the Constitution. Okay? I wrote a book on that. It's called Resisting a Damnable United States Supreme Court. It's short, it's easy. Secondly, going to the person who shows up at your door, we need to have a few Christians willing to sue the sheriff's office for a false imprisonment because they've been arrested for something that cannot be a crime unless you can prove what I said was false. So let's say that I hold up a sign outside the abortion clinic that says abortion is murder, and they arrest me because it's hate speech. Well, I sue because you've now damaged my reputation, okay? And you now have to prove that what I said is false. And then I'm going to go in and say, well, you tell me what it means to be a human being, and then I'll tell you what a murder is. You see, we just don't think outside the box at all.
That's right.
So if I got arrested as a state senator because I held up a sign at an abortion clinic that said abortion is murder, if I'd been thinking in my right mind and hadn't bowed down to the latest pronouncement of the Supreme Court, I'd sue for false imprisonment and say, I can say things as long as they're not false, but you've arrested me. You have harmed my reputation. My law firm has fired me. I'm losing money. It's a false arrest because you violated a fundamental right to my reputation because what I said is not false.
Let me ask you one more question. Senator Fowler. Yeah. So what does that look like in practical terms for social media or even for news media? If we're, so for example, if we're worried or concerned that we're taking too much of a Marxist turn or a socialist turn or a communist turn or a godless turn or whatever it is it a matter of how we phrase that so it doesn't get misconstrued as libelous, slanderous, so that if we are persecuted for that in the future, we have some kind of grounds and standing for the lawsuit that you talk about? So instead of calling Joe Biden a fascist, it'd be, well, the administration seems to be enacting some policies that lead to fascism. Is that kind of how we need to be thinking in terms of how we communicate these concerns on a public platform level?
Well, I think there's always, when Jesus said, by every word, you'll be judged and condemned or held righteous. Okay, Matthew 11, 12. We need to be careful about what we say. And you can call, let's say, Joe Biden a Marxist, but if somehow he sues you for defamation and slander, like Trump's trying to do, then I would need to prove what a Marxist is, and I would need to bring in the policies that are related to Marxism and make them prove to the jury that those were false characterizations of what Marxism does and what its policies are. But I can also avoid the problem by saying, I think Joe Biden's policies are bringing us into socialism and finally communism. I didn't say he is this. I said what he's doing is leading us this way. So I think there's a both there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And I would just end here too that again, this is not that logic.
Yes.
Is key to what we're talking about here. So we believe that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of free speech. And I believe the government, and I believe a private business can fire for any reason, basically. But also fundamentally underwriting all this, and David's pointed this out in various ways, is that, well, truth matters in all this.
That's right.
Okay. Because there was a nurse that got suspended for calling out her doctor, the doctor above her, for the doctor celebrating Charlie Kirk's assassination. So the hospital suspended the nurse, and then more came out, or more pressure started getting applied for the truth to come out. And they found out that the doctor was awful in his celebrating assassination. So they fired the doctor and unsuspended the nurse.
Right.
Because, well, what's true? That's what matters. And so this is not that, and what is true fundamentally, I think is what should be driving, and David's getting at this a lot in a lot deeper way than I am, but what should be driving how we think about, free speech, Jimmy Kimmel being suspended, President Trump being kicked off Twitter. Truth is at the heart of all this.
Sure.
Yeah.
And free speech doesn't apply in the hospital setting. Or, if you're working at my Dave's Deli, and I fire you because you say that, I have a right to say, I don't want to work around people who think like this, who
Yep.
understand what it means to be human this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you can't work here. It's not because of your
Mhm.
speech. It's because of your failure to have a proper understanding of the nature of reality that doesn't fit with me. And you've said it one way, I'll say it another way. David Hume said years ago, correspondence does not equal causation. It looks like
That's right.
cue ball hit the 8 ball, but we don't know what might have really happened in there. There's a correspondence, but it's not empirically proved because there may be things we didn't see. And so just because this happens and this happens, that's causation. That's a fallacious argument, as you've been trying to say.
Well, we have clearly just scratched the surface, and we're not even going to get to the back half. We know that in the description of this program, we had talked about there are some Charlie Kirk fallout stories we want to get to. We're going to have to save that for our next broadcast or one of the next 2 broadcasts. All of these stories, of course, are going to continue to unfold over the next days and weeks, and we will get to them. As we wrap, I want to make sure you know that if you go to crosspoliticnews.com and go under search David Fowler. That's our guest today. Here are just some of his articles that you can find and read for yourself. Remember, crosspoliticnews.com and see it at the bottom of the screen. For Senator David Fowler and Gabe Wrench, I'm Andrew Southwick. Thank you for being with us on this episode of Cross Politic Countdown. We'll see you next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. God bless.